Judicial District Court of the State of Nevada is now in session. The Honorable Barry Breslow presiding.
Thank you. Good morning, Deputy. Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. All right, welcome to Criminal Justice Calendar, Department 8. I'm Judge Breslow. Mr. Gaynor, good morning. Would you please call Mr. Hillygus matter first?
Sure. That's State versus Roger Eugene Hillygus, case number CR 191535A, matter set for hearing. Counsel and the division, please state your appearances.
Good morning, Your Honor. Amos Stege here for the state.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Stege, for the division. Thank you very much. Defense counsel.
Stewart Handte.
All right, thank you. And then is Mr. Handte here? If he is, you're welcome to come up and observe for Mr. Handte, or you can stay back there, whichever
I'm
you
fine
prefer.
right here, Judge. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Nice to see you, Mr. Handte. All right, so while I have counsel here, let me also ask you this before we talk to why we're here on something involving Mr. Hillygus's case. That case has essentially been stayed while he is on pending warrant status. But before we turn to why we're here on that case, I believe we have a hearing coming up on Mr. Hante's case to set this matter for trial. Mr. Stege, is that your understanding as well?
Yes.
Is that next week sometime?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, the date escapes me. I think it's beyond the next week. I think it's the latter part of May.
And that's the latter part of May to have a hearing to set the trial?
Yes, there was some, myself and Mr. Pitaro were in communication about finding the trial date. We've not been able to do that, and I think we could use the court's assistance in finding a date that works for everyone involved.
Okay, Mr. Pitaro, is that your understanding that we're going to have a hearing here in a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks perhaps? One of the purposes of which is to set this matter for trial?
Yes, sir, I believe it's tentatively set for the 31st to do that. But, Your Honor, before we go any further, could I just alert the court to a couple of things that I think are going to be relevant for us before you continue?
Yeah, hold on, before you do, I want to make sure, is the volume okay for everyone? Can you hear okay, Ms. Gaynor?
Yes.
Mr. Stege, can you hear okay?
Yes.
All right, so Mr. Pitaro, I think the camera is directed toward my face, but I'm going to look toward my monitor here. So if you see me looking to the left, it's because I'm looking at you as you're speaking. All right, go ahead and tell me whatever's on your mind.
All right, Your Honor, Mr. Handte bailed out of jail. I first heard from him this Saturday when he sent me an email saying that he was going to send me a letter on Monday relieving me of counsel, which I received. He asked for his file. I do not know if he has another attorney or not because there's been no substitution of attorney done. As I remember the court, the last time this issue came up, the court said that I am the attorney until you decide otherwise. So, Mr. Handte to tell that he's going to have to request the court to relieve me, and I suppose do what he did before, ask for ready hearing if he doesn't have an attorney. So, the fact of me setting a trial on the 31st or whatever, I'm not sure that I'm going to be involved in it given what Mr. Handte has done in the last few days. There's one other thing that did come up, Your Honor, and that is this hearing. It appears that this hearing was set by Mr. Stege under Mr. Hillygus' number, and when that happens, I don't get notice of it. I got notice of this hearing when the clerk sent out an email saying that Mr. Falcone wanted to join the hearing, and then I scrambled to see if there was a hearing, if I missed it, and some of the reasons I had it, I called Mr. Stege. He told me that this here was just related to Mr. Hillygus and not Mr. Handte. So what I'm assuming is that it only got filed under the Handte part of the case, which doesn't get to me on the Hillygus part. to the court's attention that I guess that on any hearings, they've got to put it with both numbers so that we both get notice. So that was basically it. So that Mr. Handte has once again decided that he doesn't want me as the attorney, and to just the housekeeping thing that just by putting something on the Hillygus doesn't necessarily get put on the Handte file.
Okay. All right, Mr. Stege, any thoughts? And then I'll give both sides the benefit of my thoughts.
As to the reason we're here, I'd like to start there. This hearing was set by me essentially administratively, so I might issue a subpoena for the production of documents. Those documents were produced to me yesterday, so.
Oh, never mind.
Never mind. Had they, I think there was some miscommunication on my part, but had they been produced earlier, I would have asked to vacate the setting.
And they just came yesterday.
And they just came yesterday.
All right.
As to the issues related to Mr. Handte, if the court is.
Well, hold on 1 second. So let me just assure you, Mr. Pitaro, Mr. Handte, going forward, even if something is filed under the A number or the B number only, please make sure a courtesy copy, a copy is filed in the other case as well. The court has tried to do that, and I just remind both sides. So that was Mr. Pitaro. Nobody was trying to deprive you of notice of what was to be, somewhat of a administrative or ministerial, possibly, request by the state, but it's moot now because they got the records for which they were possibly going to seek a subpoena. But going forward, whether it's you, whether it's Mr. Handte representing himself, whether there's a new attorney involved, we'll make sure that he, she, or both get copies of everything filed in both cases. Mr. Stege, clear on that?
Yes.
Mr. Pitaro, clear on that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, now let's move to the, well, I'll hear from the state with respect to what you just learned possibly this morning, as did the court, that Mr. Handte may be seeking to discharge Mr. Pitaro, maybe represent himself, seek to represent himself after a hearing with the court's approval, or maybe have new counsel. What are the state's thoughts? And then I'll give each side the benefit of the courts.
I will say Mr. Pitaro was kind enough to sort of warn me in advance and let me know that this issue might come up. Even besides that, the court, we're all aware that this is an issue that has come up with Mr. Handte in the past. I don't know that today's the best day to deal with it. I would suggest possibly another date, get to the bottom of it, because we've had sort of these fits and starts, I think, with Mr. Handte on this issue. Get to the bottom of it with everyone involved, and then that would also aid in our talk about trial dates.
Okay, so the way I would presume to approach it at this time, Mr. Pitaro, is if you are convinced either now or soon that your client seeks to discharge you, then I want you to file a request for a hearing. We'll set a time that works with everybody. It will be in person. In the event that the court grants the request of Mr. Handte to discharge you, then the next piece the court goes to is whether Mr. Handte seeks to represent himself or plans to have new counsel. All that will inform what the new trial date will be for Mr. Handte. So what I would suggest is in writing, please, Mr. Pitaro, it doesn't have to be lengthy, but file a request for motion to withdraw. And you can indicate in there that your client seeks to terminate your services. The state can then have an opportunity to, in writing, put its position down. The court will have a hearing. I'll have you up here, Mr. Pitaro. We'll try to marry it up with anything you have going on in the north if it's convenient for you on other matters. I'll make sure that Mr. Handte is available, make sure the state's available, and the court will have a hearing. And if the result of the hearing is that you're discharged, then off you go. If the court decides that you're not to be discharged, the court will make the appropriate findings, and you'll stay on. If the court discharges you and decides Mr. Handte is in a position to represent himself, which is a constitutional right after the court weighs after proper canvass, whether Mr. Handte appreciates essentially what he intends to do, then so be it. If not, the court will decide whether Mr. Handte has funds sufficient to retain new counsel, or whether he's deemed indigent under the law, in which case one would be appointed to him. So much to talk about. This morning is not the moment to do that, but we can do it soon on account of this hearing we have at the end of May for picking the trial date and other things that both you both, Mr. Handte and the court have going on. All right, Mr. Pitaro, any thoughts based on what the court just said?
The only thing, Your Honor, on that hearing, I would ask that I be allowed to appear by Zoom. I don't quite truthfully think that an appearance by me would add anything to the hearing. This would be Mr. Handte saying what he wishes to say, and he has a right to fire me, I guess. And the court has the right to rule on the issues of how that is done. And the court's right, you keep me on or let me off after that hearing, but I guess what I'm asking is that if I could appear by Zoom on it, it'd make it much easier for me, Your Honor. Especially that 31st date, which I thought we were going to do by Zoom. That's a holiday weekend, and it would be very difficult with reservations, et cetera, to do it. So I'd ask that I be allowed to do it by Zoom, and that we do it on the 31st, which is, I think, the date that we're looking for the trial date, Your Honor.
You know, the Zoom hearing for something like this, the court's not trying to unnecessarily increase the costs to anyone involved. And it's not lost on the court that we're still in the midst of the pandemic, although luckily it seems to be trending down. Although depending on what news you hear, it might be making a small bounce back. On the other hand, there are interactions between counsel and client in person that are often tough to replicate virtually. There's a chance that you two talk things out. There's a chance that you two meet in the juror room before the hearing and discuss whatever issues are that Mr. Handte may foresee that you might be in a position to directly address. I'm not saying you can't speak with each other ahead of time. Of course you can. I'm not saying that we couldn't handle that in a breakout fashion during a Zoom hearing or a blended hearing like this. Sure, we've done that before and we've had success, but it's not quite the same thing. The date of May 31st, that's not etched in stone. That can be moved if it's particularly expensive because of the holiday, but I have to give it more thought. I'll issue an order setting a hearing after I have a motion. You don't have to repeat the arguments you've just made in the motion to withdraw about a Zoom hearing versus in person unless you want to. I'm fully apprised as to your thoughts, Mr. Pitaro, on proceeding virtually on something like this. Mr. Stege, any thoughts you'd like to share with the court on any issue that we've talked about this morning at this time?
No, only to say as to the Zoom issue, I'm neutral on it, and respect whatever the court is going to do.
Okay, all right, I want to make sure you heard that, Mr. Pitaro. Mr. Stege, and I'm not sure that microphone on his Zoom link you can hear very well, but he said he's neutral on the issue of whether you'd be allowed to appear virtually. He's not arguing against it, in other words, okay? All right, so what that means is the issue on Mr. Hillygus' case, it's not for the court's determination at this time or action because the documents have been received by the state. On Mr. Handte's piece, Mr. Pitaro was notified the court to expect a motion to withdraw. The court intends to set it for a hearing. The court will make a decision once receiving the motion and the state's response, whether to do it in person or blended virtually. All right, anything else, Mr. Pitaro, at this time?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Stege?
No,
All right, thank you. Appreciate your being here. I think that is the only Zoom blend hearing we have this morning. Mr. Gaynor, so when ready, you can end the link and we move on to another matter. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Pitaro.
Thank you.